To my left, we have Robert Tass, JP Morgan Chase, Bill Pinkman, Millward Brown, Aaron Fetters, Kellogg's, Gian Fulgoni, comScore, and Nishat Mehta with dunnhumby. And we're going to talk about big data. Nishat, big data, what does it mean to you?
Great, always good to go first on these. I think we're all probably familiar with sort of the common definitions for it, the three V's, right? The volume, velocity, and variety. For me, I think the one that we oftentimes undervalue is the notion of actually taking data that's not first party. And so for me, a lot of our focus is actually, we work as a company that collects shopping behavior on behalf of a number of retail clients that we have. For me, that's not enough. Where can we get data from other sources, whether it be social networks, whether it be mobile, whether it be payment networks, things along those lines. So that's really the ad.
Robert, when someone in the boardroom, if Jamie Dimon, when he asks you, like, hey, what's this big data I'm hearing about, what do you say?
I tell them it's all about our customers and a way for us to better understand what our customers are doing, needing, interacting with us, and it allows our business leaders a better way to prioritize how we're going to use data to help drive our business outcomes that we want.
So it doesn't really have to do with the size issue. This is more a what are we doing with it issue.
I think big data is a little obviously overhyped, and I think there's lots of forms of data that can be very valuable to our business and to other businesses. I think that the important aspect is that data is at the centerpiece, or the customer's at the centerpiece of our strategy, and data supports that.
Aaron.
I think big data is job security right now.
I like big data then.
Yeah, big data's been around for a long, long time. It's not a new thing, especially for an advertiser or a retailer. We've always had lots of data. It's just truly exploded, I think, as we talk about things like the digital and social media that we're all so familiar with now. I mean, we now, as an advertiser, we're generating tens of billions of impressions every year in the digital space alone. And then, we're at a measurement conference, so you think about the metrics that we like to track against each of those impressions. So you're multiplying that by 5 and 10 times. And so we've got more and more to sift through. And, I always go back to signal and the noise. It's a job security because our job is to try to identify that signal in all the data. I think that is really indicative of something we want to take action on versus just the noise.
So Gian, you've been involved in marketing data for quite some time, and we're probably one of the first to bring bigger data and more census level data into this industry. A number of years ago. What does this? You're a young man, so
Thank you. I was ready for
that.
Yeah, you could argue that big data really started with the growth of computing power, and I think that the moniker now seems to have come about because of the growth in computing power, but the drop in cost. And so you've got just sensors and small computing devices and mobile and the internet that's generating just a massive data, and somebody said, let's call it big data. But you could argue that we started generating all of this stuff 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So Bill, you work in, compared to others, maybe in an area of smaller data, as we've talked about. How do you see big data as a concept, and how do you see what you do connecting with the massive amounts of data coming into the market?
Sure. Well, for me, the big data term is also often strange because it's starting with sort of a characteristic, big, small, size, scope. Those are all kind of IT-related pieces. The more important part, is it any good? Does it help you? And for us, it's always been a combination of there are these new data assets, which are much more census-based from new measurement devices that never existed before. So that just opens up a world for us of exploration, and it gives us new analytic abilities to answer the same questions. So when we approach a question of, is this marketing campaign working? Why or why not? How can we make it better? Big data is part of that answer in terms of the social media and everything else.
So the question that we've been asked to address today is, how can big data move research forward? And that sort of suggests advertising research forward, or research in the marketing industry. I was reminded last week when I was listening to Dave Poltrak at the Nielsen, the Consumer 360 conference, he put up a quote about, which many of us have seen before, about the fact that there's no proof that sex-age demographics are predictors for purchase. And this is something that Dave's been on a bit of a jihad for a while. What I didn't realize was that he first delivered that quote here at this conference in 1974, when he was a very young man. Was left out of middle school that day, on a science fair project. But that begs a question, which I'd like each of you to address. As an industry, advertising has not embraced small data. I mean, it gives it a little space at the table, but it really hasn't embraced it. Is something going to change now? Robert.
I think I'll start and say that, I think there's one of the biggest challenges that we have in the business is talent that understands how to apply these insights to the business. I think your question's a little leading, which is great. I think that the big shift that has to happen is from the traditional marketing department to the customer department. And I think as we use data and research and all the tools that are now available to us, our whole paradigm shifts of how we think about. As you were talking about marketing and advertising, I look at data that impacts obviously those buckets, but also impacts our product, our service. All of those pieces are now tied together, and there's this huge convergence around it.
So,
go ahead.
Just a comment on that question, which is an interesting one. I think that at least in media research, that it was the advent of the internet that started to change the whole scope of the data that was used, and we had to move beyond. I said this morning. I know the ESPN folks said it as well. Had to move beyond just small samples of consumers and measuring them, and try to do things at scale. And when what you're trying to measure is generating the data that allows you to measure it at scale, then you are into a whole new paradigm. And I think that the internet is the beginning of completely different measurement systems for media.
So, Aaron, I'll ask you and put this in maybe like a Kellogg's reference. So, obviously, a lot of the things that many of the marketers operate under today are things that are built into bigger legacy practices or bigger deals. I'm sure Kellogg's deal with Walmart involves gross rating point support on a weekly basis and things like that, which may be a little data reference to the past. How do you see it changing strategically across a company like yours?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I think it can be. First of all, what I'll say about the big data, small data, traditional research, big data analysis, it's not an either or, it's definitely an and. It's bringing the two together. Completely agree with Robert that there's a gap in, I think, the ability to take what we're seeing and turn that into a strategic advantage with, let's say, a customer, right? But that's honestly, like, some of the opportunities we're looking for is where we develop expertise in analyzing and understanding big data and what it's telling us. Let's say a dunnhumby piece of data. What can we learn from analyzing frequent shopper data and things like that? We want to take that and make a strategic advantage out of it with our customers and say, it's not just our great Kellogg products that we bring to you as a differentiator. We're also bringing capabilities based on what we've learned through understanding big data to you that we can use together to create better executions, essentially.
Nishat?
Yeah, I feel like probably one of the biggest differences in big data is that it's actually enabling measurement and research to move towards activation. Mm-hmm. So we started mid-90s, started working for Tesco. Big data, the technology didn't exist for us to collect every single shopping transaction, so we sampled everything. Because of that, we didn't necessarily feel comfortable sending one-to-one communications because we were associating you with a bucket of people that were similar to you. So our activations were things in store, floor stickers and fuel pump, media, things along those lines. I would say today, big data gives us the ability to look at each individual individually. It's a direct democracy, not a representative democracy. And that enables us to start doing things on the activation side that are much more direct.
So, Bill, I want to reference back to Arnie's presentation earlier this morning, where we saw this, pretty extraordinary cross-platform kind of data that's being brought together. One of the things that struck me was it ultimately is all being conformed to a crossover of 2,000. Now, it's the best we can do at the moment, and I'm sure that will get big. What do you think about the notion that we're many times having to take the big data and conform it to small data?
Well, for self-interested, I love it. But I actually fully agree with what everyone is saying here, not for the sake of pure lack of creative tension, but I agree with this notion
Bring on creative tension, we like that.
What we keep finding is the irony of the moment is that the more big data insights we get, the more need for small data we get as well. So we're doing more primary research, traditional surveying than ever before, which is sort of this strange kind of thing. But when you put them together, what we keep finding is instead of has big data replaced research, in sort of a Gordo Gecko-esque, it's liberated research because we're no longer using primary research for things it doesn't need to be used for. So behavioral tracking, we've got endless supplies of behavioral data sets, but what keeps coming out of those is the models and the analytics are so fancy, yet they continually escalate new questions that require often more primary research to focus on. And I think it's that convergence that's kind of elevated the entire, kind of all sorts of data sets.
I think that's a great point, because I can remember experiencing it happening in the 80s and going to the 90s as scanning data came along. I remember at one point thinking, with all of this behavioral data, it's going to eliminate the need to run survey research. I remember thinking that, and the opposite happened.
Right.
I think that it actually spawned a whole bunch of additional questions that you could only answer by actually talking to people and surveying them. So we might well be on another interesting change with the availability of big data.
I think it just goes
today.
back to the variety. I mean, Dave, to your point, even if it's only 2,000 people, it's every single media exposure that they're having across 5 different media platforms. I would argue that's big data. It's just 2,000 people, it'll grow, but it's a variety of information about them. That's a good point.
So yeah, it's interesting when what is it that makes it big? Is it the impact that you see? Is its robustness, its completeness?
I mean, I think Robert, your point was a valid one. It's got to be customer focused, and the idea is how can you know everything you need to know about a customer to know the right message to deliver to them? And to me, if you can start to learn things across a variety of things, it's big data.
I think it's volume and velocity, and there's so many, I think someone said it, there's so many different inputs now, and I think half our battle is figuring out what valuable data is, and then doing the insights against that and making it usable for a business person.
So what about the people, Robert? I mean, and I want to touch on this a little bit because you come from an interesting background, having built a very successful career in enterprise technology, in enterprise software sales, and then before you came into digital advertising, and now in marketing. I mean, that's an interesting trajectory. It's not a classic route. Most people weren't selling database software 20 years ago, who are now running marketing groups.
I can't hold down a job, obviously, but it's actually allowed me to be really have a unique skill set and lens into this. As I talk to the traditional advertising teams and I talk to our own analytics functions, I'm kind of the glue that brings those both worlds together and allows them to validate the research findings and the traditional means that we use to validate our campaigns, to actually matching that to customer insights and being able to bridge the gap between paid, owned, earned. I think it's a challenge. I mean, as I see, and we were talking earlier, that I think that executives across the board, and I spend 50% of my job evangelizing and educating executives in our company as to what digital means to their business and lives. I think it's incumbent upon every single executive in any company to take the ownership of how digital is impacting their business and how data can be more meaningful to their business and really take ownership. And I think that's a lot of training and a lot of effort has to go into that. And I know Aaron would probably have
Yes, exactly. I want to go to Aaron, and I want to hit on both things. One, talk a little bit about that evangelism role across your company. And then second, as you're scaling your businesses and departments, assuming this is becoming bigger and more focused, what are the kind of people you're looking for to ultimately take your role as you can move up and over and grow?
Yeah, it's a challenge. That evangelism piece is a challenge because we don't find many people like kind of the people sitting on this panel right now who can go into both the sort of the computer room where all the models are being ran and look at the numbers on the screen and understand what they're seeing, and then walk into the boardroom and have a discussion with the CMO or the CEO about, hey, this is why it's important. And the CEOs are asking, big data, what's our strategy? And they don't really know what they're asking. They just hear it a lot.
I'm saying they don't really know. They don't know at all.
They hear it a lot. And so I think as you think about the future of market research and analytic organizations, you've got to have two really distinct type of individuals. One is the really strong math and model-based experts, but also the people who can understand the math deep enough and translate that into a story Tell a great story, and do that in a way that's really impactful and drives insights all the way up to the top of the organization, and we'll get them to act, because it is about big data without the acting on it is kind of pointless, right? We've wasted all of our time.
I think that talent is obviously a really important piece, but and you kind of hinted at this, the rate of which things are moving is so fast, and I look at it inside in us as we are really trying to reorganize ourselves around the ability to move faster. And we're certainly not good at it by any stretch. And I look at our agencies and I look at all our partners, and it's something that's the critical, as you have any kind of insights and data, is to realign the way we use this information to take advantage of it is probably the secret sauce.
Yeah. The challenge of the two big challenges, one is finding the people who are going to handle all of this stuff, and the other is, as you say, the data is now just being generated in real time, and it's causing you to have to make marketing decisions faster than you ever had before, and that's a process challenge. In terms of people, McKinsey did an interesting study on big data, and they concluded that while there was a massive opportunity to lower the costs of running businesses, and they focused on that rather than driving demand, it's clearer often that with data you can get cost savings. But they said that in the US alone, we were missing 300,000 deep data engineers. All right, that's bad enough. 1.5 million data savvy managers to really be able to realize all of the full potential of all of this data. So the people is a big issue.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I think that's another one of the ironies of data science is sexy, but no one's a data scientist, right? So from a hiring perspective, it makes it extraordinarily difficult. I think we can all identify the need. It's hard enough to write the job description because these are new kinds of data, but then you start looking for the person. And you had a sense historically of, in the small data world, I would know analytically the skill sets, I'd know the storytelling skill sets I require. But in kind of a data creation perspective, from a big data world, you're pulling from all sorts of different backgrounds and specialties that we really haven't touched on historically.
So do we have, one of the question I'll have, which is, I think probably not unlike, let's say, software engineers and others, we've seen areas like this where we have a dearth of talent in a pipeline. But let's go to the Moneyball example. And probably the thing that was striking about Moneyball was not that there were statistics about who were better baseball players and who could have been picked. We didn't have a general manager in any baseball team in the major leagues before Billy Beane who was willing to bet his business, life, and franchise on it, and then stick with it after it didn't work that well in the beginning. And so, I actually wonder, how do you see this in your different organizations, or Nishat, in companies that you work with?
So I think the benefit that we have is I don't know that we're fighting the uphill battle that Billy Beane had to fight. I think corporations know that.
Well, not that Billy Beane had to fight that, because he wasn't the statistician that the people who
fair enough, but
worked for Billy Beane, because he had a Billy Beane.
He was the one that was going to get fired if the team didn't do well. I think we have organizations that know that they want to do something with big data, and I feel like we might have a communication issue in that we keep focusing on big data as being the way in which you measure and the way in which you derive insights without actually explaining at the C-level what you do with those insights. And so to me, we need to start turning the conversation into, great, I collect location data and it's wonderful and there's all sorts of things that I can do with it, insights about where my customers are, but it will allow me to better measure out-of-home advertising, which will result in an ROI, et cetera, et cetera. All the things that we're used to doing when it didn't have to do with data, all of a sudden we've moved away from because we have all this data and we believe insights are the only thing we can derive from it.
The other thing that makes it easier is that once a company in your particular industry has demonstrated that they've successfully harnessed data, then everything changes, and I think people are much more open to it. I think in the CPG industry, what you folks have done with Kroger and Kroger's financial results since you started working with them, you think the other supermarket industry operators haven't noticed that? And so that the proof generates, I think, a good support for the use of it.
I gotta tell you, David, here's where I'm really fortunate I feel very fortunate to be at Kellogg, because I'm not 2 months into my job at Kellogg, and I get an opportunity to present to our CMO, and I use Moneyball as the analogy to explain to him what we're trying to do in the digital analytics space. And within 20 seconds, he stops me and he says, I got it, because I was using the Moneyball example. He said, I get it, I got it, I love it. and I've had his full support to go and very robustly measure what we do. And he understood that without the measurement, you're never going to get to, from a Moneyball example, those stats like on base percentage and wins above replacement that were what ended up helping teams like the Athletics and Red Sox, build winning teams. I'm fortunate to have a Billy Beane type, hey, I'm willing to do this, I got it, I get it. But I think that is, you're absolutely right. Like, you've got to have somebody who's willing to say, yeah, I get it, go do this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for anyone here, when do you think, and maybe it's a good place to start for you to start, Robert, when do you think some of the insights that are generated with the big data and by this group are going to be such an important metric that not only are they part of every earnings call and they're part of every report, but actually the board wants the big data person to be available in the boardroom as they have demanded the CFO be available in the boardroom over the last couple decades?
Now, I mean, I think it's and there's obviously degrees, and I'd love to obviously have a bigger seat there, but I think our insights at a customer-driven level for our business is so paramount. It's a foundation to how Jamie runs the company, and our goal is to enhance that. And as Aaron was talking, one of the questions I was going to ask him was that, I think people are very easy to focus on bottom of the funnel because it's so measurable and it's so easy. Mm-hmm. As we take these great insights and we can move up that funnel and figure out how to apply it to broader insights, I think that's where we need the most help from our partners out there. And I'd love to hear how he does that at Kellogg.
Yeah, and I think that we've chosen to be very systemic in what we measure so that we can identify, I always say, the stats that are most indicative. Just like Moneyball, they said home runs and RBIs are not most indicative of us building a winning team. We kind of said the same thing in digital. It's like click-through rate, not indicative, but what is. And that's why by being consistent over time, we're able to kind of weed out the things that aren't really indicative and focus in on those that are. And one of the topics that I'd like to throw out to the panel, because kind of related to that, I want to go back to Gail mentioned it in the opening this morning, is this, we sometimes lose focus of the power of creative. And, we're talking about big data, but without great creative, all the big data in the world is probably not going to help our message be more impactful. And so, I'm interested in thoughts on how big data impacts even before we try to go deliver media, but, the power of the message that we create.
I think the fact that that Kellogg's lets Aaron publicly talk about these,
You assume he has permission?
You're right.
it seems to me to indicate that up to the senior levels of that company, I'm going to let Aaron speak for it, but somebody, it seems to me, at Kellogg's has said there is a positive result for us publicly talking about where we're at with all of this data and all of this digital stuff.
Well, certainly. I mean, we just talked about the talent, what a challenge it is to get the right talent. And I think that that's part of what we want to demonstrate is, hey, we take this seriously, and, we want good talent, and we seek great results and great partnerships.
But there's an image is there an image, a reputation, perspective that you're trying to create there of the company by showing that you're at the leading edge of this
We've
stuff?
been around for 80, 90 years making cereal, so we got to show that we are still out there, on the leading edge of marketing.
It's amazing to me how many companies that you traditionally or historically wouldn't have expected to get up and publicly talk about the things that they're doing with data are just appearing at all of these conferences today.
Yeah, and actually the publicly thing hits a topic which is just a little too timely not to bring up. In the online world and in data, there's always been some issues around privacy and a question of, and tracking, with the disclosures around the NSA programs and PRISM, it's another, we're going to have another moment of privacy or lack of privacy. How do you all see that as an issue? It's not one I want to dwell on, but obviously, how do you deal with it in each of your roles, the privacy issue?
I'll go first and say it's obviously one of the most important things that customers entrust us with, a lot of financial data and important personal data. We guard that with our lives, and it's obviously the most important thing. We obviously are trying to be as transparent as possible whenever we use that information in a thoughtful way, but we try to give the customer as much data and control over that decision making as possible, and I think that's incumbent upon us as a lifelong partner to any customer.
If I can jump in as well. I completely agree. Without privacy, we put ourselves in a real risk. And just for fun, Jay Leno said it best the other night when he said, did you see this? It was great. He said, I knew we were electing a president that would listen to the people, but I didn't know he'd actually listen to the people. And I mean, that really captures the spirit of it. But for us, what's kind of pushed us to do more of, which I think is a really good thing, and big data has inspired this as well, is much more interactivity between consumers. So whether it's a survey respondent or if it's sort of an ongoing customer relationship, it's much more of a dialogue than a one-time observation, one-time question, a back and forth. Because I think privacy tells you, you got to respect, but if you take that further, most folks really don't want to be interrupted. But if they're already in a dialogue with you, that kind of changes the conversation, and you tend to get better results as well. So I think privacy has helped stimulate that quite a bit.
Nishat?
I was just going to say that the transparency piece, in my opinion, runs in a couple of different ways. There's transparency about what data you're collecting and how you're using it. I really feel like it's also important to be transparent about the value that the customer is getting in the collection of that data. I think we find, some of you have probably heard this, a gentleman collected all of his data and then went up on Kickstarter and is offering for a couple of bucks, people can actually get access to one guy's data. And his argument is, I don't know, $50 million of advertising is actually spent on data like mine. Why am I not seeing any of it? And my whole point is, well, you scanned your loyalty card every time you bought groceries. You got a discount, so you did get something for it. You use Facebook for free. You use Google for free. There's a whole host of things you get for free in exchange for your information, but I don't think we make that obvious to the user, so the user feels like they somehow are getting the short end of the stick.
So privacy is just such a huge issue today. I think looking at it from a research perspective, you have to do what I think the industry has always done, which is you have to have explicit permission when you're collecting the information. But there's another issue, and I think that's been handled pretty well in the research industry, but the other issue that's out there now is the use of data that's collected as a byproduct of transactions, let's say, or site visitation or whatever, where that data is then used to run targeted advertising anonymously, but it's targeted advertising. The problem is, as I see it, that even though it's anonymous, consumers are so spooked by the idea of this targeting. And when they see a retargeted ad, it just drives them nuts. And I'm not sure they totally understand it, but it's enough to cause a concern. The problem that then creates is that the legislators are listening to those consumers' voices, and that drives decisions that they might make that could not be in the interests of the whole advertising industry.
And I think that's where it comes back to education, to Akash's point up there, is that it's they're getting value. We've got to give them, again, I'll use myself as an example. Cookies are, I log in, I don't have to log in again. Right. I mean, it's saving me time. I'm in favor of that, and I'm willing to make that exchange. But I think we've got to do an over-the-top job as an industry, not just us, or advertisers as an industry, to educate the consumer in a thoughtful way and provide them tools.
So I agree, but good luck with trying to do that.
Yeah. So we just have a couple minutes left in this panel, and I want to ask one last question I'd like each of you to address. So over the last 12 months, we've seen a number of large transactions. I mean, we're in New York, and Wall Street's just to the south of us, so we've got to talk a little bit about what's going on in the financial market out there and the businesses. We've seen some really big transactions around marketing technology companies. I mean, even just last week, I think IBM bought 2 companies that have marketing implications. We've seen Buddy Media buy Salesforce. We've seen Oracle. We've seen a number of people making moves. A lot of people are talking about that the CMO of today and the future may be buying more IT than the IT departments have classically. I mean, it could be a bigger spend. What's the one area that you could imagine in your departments, if you had to check in the budget, where you would start making investments in-house? Or do you believe that? Do you believe that the research department and the marketing department is going to be a big part of the role? And what are the kinds of technologies that you think that it's going to, that you would want to have? And these have to be quick.
I think my 2 answers are a continuation of the data problem. I think that we're just scratching the surface at what we're doing there. And then the second piece is really taking that data and making it insightful into workflow type systems to manage our programs and our businesses in a more thoughtful way.
For us, it's definitely a focus on simulation and using from sort of data integration driven simulation. So it's more of a combination of IT firms that have built the principles of behavioral economics in that we were testing forward. So it's less about sort of the storage and the guts, but more about the foresight and the
It's
decision
more like
making
predictive
effort.
modeling and
Yeah.
foresight.
I would be investing in creating relationships with consumers that build first-party data. I think we've seen a tremendous value out of first-party data versus third-party data, and then the integration of data sources around that first-party data.
I'd be making sure I had a really data-savvy CMO, and I'd really start to question where my CIO's responsibilities end and the CMO responsibilities begin.
And I really like sentiment analysis. I think we undervalue the unstructured content, especially because it represents probably 90% of the data that's out there, whether it's actual text or even voice and some of the things that our government seems to be tracking about us.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you, Nishat, Gian, Aaron, Bill, Robert, and we can give them a...
Good job.